A man spent 33 years welding steel alone above a Texas canyon. He died before he could finish. That single fact tells you almost everything you need to know about what this series is. 13 houses, 13 acts of refusal. Refusal to build the way everyone else builds. Refusal to accept the limits that architecture, common sense, and ordinary life tend to impose. One man dug 70 rooms beneath the California desert with his bare hands. Someone else turned a decommissioned aircraft into a home suspended above a jungle. Another person engineered a house that, at the press of a button, seals itself into a windowless concrete block. These are not curiosities. They are not the architectural equivalent of a carnival sideshow. They are primary documents of obsession, evidence of what happens when a human being decides that 4 walls and a roof are not enough, and then spends years, decades, sometimes an entire lifetime proving it. We selected 13 structures, each of which breaks a different foundational rule. The rule of form. One house contains no straight lines whatsoever. The rule of material. One was fired whole inside a massive kiln. The rule of place. One has balanced on a sharp river rock for more than 50 years. The rule of scale. One measures less than a meter across. The rule of reasonable limits. One man kept welding long after any reasonable person would have stopped, and the canyon still holds what he left behind. The question people usually ask is why? Why would anyone do this? But that question leads nowhere useful. The more precise question, the one this series is actually trying to answer, is why in exactly this way? What does it mean that a person chose this particular form of refusal, this particular shape of obsession? And what does the answer reveal about the parts of human nature that a normal house was never designed to contain? There is not a single straight angle anywhere inside this house. Not in the walls, not in the doorways, not in the transition between floor and ceiling. Nowhere. That is not an oversight or a structural compromise. It is the entire point. Number 13 on our list is the Nautilus house in Naucalpan, Mexico City, and it may be the most coherent architectural argument ever made in ferrocement and steel wire. Mexican architect Javier Senosain completed it in 2006 for a family of 4, and what looks from the outside like a giant seashell dropped into a suburban lot is, from the inside, a fully functional home where 2 children grew up surrounded by curves that never once resolve into a corner. Senosain had spent years refining what he called biomorphic architecture, a discipline built on a single provocative premise. Form should follow not function, but living nature. The structural logic of the Nautilus house flows directly from that premise. A framework of steel mesh is coated with ferrocement, cement reinforced with fine steel rods, a material flexible enough to hold any curve the designer imagines, and strong enough to hold a roof. The result is a continuous organic surface where walls dissolve into ceilings and ceilings sink back into floors without interruption. Stained glass windows in the Tiffany tradition scatter colored light through the interior, deepening the sensation of being inside something alive rather than something built. From the street, the shape is unmistakable. The house traces the logarithmic spiral of an actual Nautilus shell, the same curve mathematicians associate with the golden ratio found throughout the natural world. Senosain was not reaching for a poetic resemblance. He was making a precise claim that the geometry evolution refined over hundreds of millions of years is geometry a human being can inhabit. Our next entry challenges common sense in an entirely different register, not through shape, but through location. A tiny wooden cabin that has stood for decades on the tip of a river rock, surviving floods that erased everything around it. A tiny wooden house has survived more than 55 years on a needle of rock in the middle of one of the Balkans' most unpredictable rivers, and it was never meant to last a single winter. That contradiction is the whole story. In 1968, a group of local swimmers on the Drina River in Serbia looked at a sharp, narrow rock outcrop, barely wide enough to stand on, and decided it was the right place for a summer shelter. No engineering firm was consulted, no permit was filed. The structure they built was modest, almost to the point of invisibility. Rough-cut wooden boards, a small roof, walls thin enough to suggest the builders knew exactly how temporary this was supposed to be. Except it wasn't temporary. What kept the house alive through decades of flooding is a principle so simple it sounds accidental. The walls have deliberate gaps that let water pass straight through. When the Drina rises, and it rises hard, carrying tree trunks, bridge debris, and walls of brown water, the current enters the house on one side and exits on the other without building pressure against the frame. The structure doesn't fight the river, it yields to it, and that yielding is what saves it. This is number 12 on our list, and the reason it qualifies isn't tourism or architecture. The house on the Drina River rock in Serbia earns its place because it represents something rarer than clever design, accumulated folk knowledge tested against real catastrophe. After every major flood, local residents have returned to rebuild it, sometimes completely, sometimes just patching what remained. The cycle of destruction and reconstruction has happened so many times that the house itself has become less a building and more a ritual. Seen from the riverbank, the image is almost comic. A wooden cube the size of a garden shed, perched on a spike of rock, surrounded by churning water with no visible way to reach it. But the comedy contains a serious argument. The house on the Drina doesn't claim that humans belong in impossible places. It simply proves that humans will keep returning to them anyway, board by board, season after season, for over half a century. A house with bulletproof windows and an armoured door that weighs several hundred kilograms has no electricity whatsoever. Not a single outlet, not one light switch. That is not a design oversight. That is a precise statement about what the builder feared and what he did not. Number 11 on our list is Casa de Penedo, and the logic embedded in its contradictions tells you more about it than any architectural description ever could. The house appeared in 1974 in the mountains of Faf in northern Portugal, wedged between four enormous granite boulders. The owner, whose identity was never fully disclosed to the public, did not impose a structure onto the landscape. He read what the mountain had already built over millions of years and worked within it. The four monoliths became the load-bearing walls. The rock beneath became the foundation. The stone above became the roof. Water comes from a natural spring inside the rock itself. Inside, there is a fireplace, stone walls, and the bare minimum of furniture required to occupy a space without abandoning it entirely. From the outside, Casa de Penedo reads as prehistoric, low, dark, pressed into the hillside as though it grew there rather than was placed. That impression is not accidental. The builder was not interested in announcing his presence to the landscape, but he was intensely interested in what other people might do if they found him. Hence the armoured door, hence the bulletproof glass. The absence of electricity is not asceticism performed for aesthetic reasons. It is the elimination of infrastructure that can be traced, monitored, or cut. Every choice in this building follows the same internal logic. Maximum resistance to human threat. Total submission to natural conditions. The structure has not changed by a single centimetre since 1974. Today, it operates as a museum, drawing thousands of visitors annually who walk through stone rooms and press their hands against glass that was designed to stop a bullet. The identity of the original owner remains officially unconfirmed. What he built, however, is completely legible once you accept his premise. If the Portuguese mountains hide this house inside stone, our next entry does the opposite entirely. It floats above the French Riviera in the shape of soap bubbles. Built by a man who believed the right angle was a crime against human nature. Number 10 on this list belongs to a place that resists every category you might reach for. Not a house, not a palace in any classical sense, not a sculpture, though it behaves like one. What Antti Lovag began constructing in 1975 on a rocky promontory called Cap Theul, just outside Cannes, was something the architectural lexicon simply had no word for. Lovag was Hungarian by birth, radical by conviction. He called his philosophy habitology, a self-coined science of human dwelling, and its central argument was almost disarmingly simple. The right angle is a lie. It is hostile to the body, foreign to nature, an imposition of geometry onto a creature that was born curved, that breathes in curves, that moves in curves. So he built in spheres and ellipses, bubbles essentially. Dozens of them fused together across the Mediterranean cliff face, connected by passages and terraces and an open-air amphitheatre that seats 500 people above the sea. The total footprint reaches roughly 2,800 square metres. 10 bedrooms, multiple living spaces, not a single flat wall anywhere in the structure. In 1991, with the complex still unfinished, Pierre Cardin bought it. The fit was almost too perfect. Cardin had spent decades turning fashion into a manifesto, geometric, futurist, stubbornly unconventional, and here was a building that operated on exactly the same frequency. He completed it, inhabited it, threw parties here for the global elite, staged fashion shows on the cliffs with the Mediterranean as a backdrop. After Cardin's death in 2021, the Palais Bull was listed for sale at approximately €350 million. And while we are speaking of homes that break the rules of form, there is one that breaks the very concept of scale. A retired commercial jet is someone's luxury bedroom. That sentence sounds like the setup for a joke, but at number 9 on our list, it is simply the reality of spending a night at Costa Verde Hotel in Costa Rica. The Boeing 727 in question rolled off the production line in 1965. For decades, it did exactly what it was built to do: carry passengers across oceans and continents at altitude. When its airworthy life finally ended, the aircraft faced the fate that meets most decommissioned planes, being broken apart for scrap metal. That is the economically rational outcome. What happened instead was something considerably less rational and considerably more interesting. Alan Vyland, the owner of Costa Verde Hotel, bought the fuselage and decided it belonged in the jungle. Not as a monument, not as a sculpture, but as a functioning place to sleep. The operation required to make that happen was staggering in its ambition. The fuselage was cut into sections, hauled along winding mountain roads near Manuel Antonio National Park, and then reassembled on a purpose-built steel platform raised 15 meters above the rainforest canopy. Moving a structure of that size through those roads alone was an undertaking that most engineers would have quietly advised against. Inside, the aircraft has been converted into a 2-bedroom luxury suite with a living room, a fully equipped kitchen, and open terraces looking out over the Pacific Ocean and the dense tropical forest below. The original oval portholes remain, and through them guests watch toucans and howler monkeys go about their business at eye level. The tail section, the aerodynamic curves, the unmistakable profile of the aircraft, all of it is preserved on the outside, frozen in a posture of flight it will never complete. The deeper irony is this: a machine engineered for maximum speed and constant movement has become one of the most stationary vantage points imaginable, suspended above a living ecosystem and going absolutely nowhere. That tension between what the object was and what it now does is precisely what makes it extraordinary. If a Boeing 727 in the jungle strikes you as extravagant, the next entry on our list suggests that human creativity is capable of taking even more literal shapes. A shoe salesman once built a 3-story, 15-meter-long house shaped like a giant boot, and people actually slept inside it. not as a stunt, not as a temporary installation, as a fully functioning home with a kitchen, a bathroom, and multiple rooms. That is the Haynes Shoe House in Pelham, Pennsylvania, and it sits at number 8 on our list. The logic behind it, once you understand who Marlon Haynes was, becomes almost inevitable. By 1948, when construction was completed, Haynes controlled more than 40 shoe stores across Pennsylvania. He had built his fortune methodically, but his approach to advertising was anything but conventional. He believed that a truly effective promotion had to be physically impossible to overlook. A roadside sign fades into the background. A newspaper ad gets turned, but a 7-metre-tall wooden boot standing among ordinary suburban houses, that stops traffic. So he built one. The structure rises 3 full stories, complete with a visible heel, laces, toe, and shaft, all rendered in wood, plaster, and steel, with real windows cut into the sides and a working front door. Haynes would personally greet visitors who came out of curiosity, feed them, offer them ice cream, and send them home with complimentary pairs of shoes from his stores. The building doubled as accommodation for elderly couples and, remarkably, as a honeymoon destination for newlyweds who did not mind the unusual setting. After Haynes died in 1952, the house passed through several owners, was converted into a museum, fell into disrepair, was restored, and eventually earned a place on the National Register of Historic Places. It now draws thousands of visitors annually. What the Haynes Shoe House represents is a particular strain of American commercial ambition, one that saw no clear boundary between business and spectacle, between a product and a monument. The next entry on our list comes from a completely different tradition, where Haynes expanded outward, turning commerce into architecture, a builder in Warsaw compressed inward, turning architecture into a statement about what human habitation actually requires. A grown adult cannot turn sideways inside it. That is not a metaphor, not an exaggeration for effect. It is a structural fact about number 7 on our list. The Keret house in Warsaw, officially certified as the narrowest residential building on the planet. At its tightest point, the interior measures just 92 centimetres across. At its most generous, it stretches to 152 centimetres, and that, inside these walls, genuinely feels like space to breathe. Why does this building exist at all? Because a gap existed first. After World War II, Warsaw was rebuilt rapidly, and between 2 apartment blocks in the Wola district, a leftover sliver of space was simply never filled. Not a lane, not an alley, a crack between walls, an urban accident that persisted for decades. In 2012, Polish architect Jakub Szczesny looked at that 92-centimetre void and saw not a problem, but an argument. That architecture is not about scale, but about intention. The result is a habitable paradox. The Keret house contains a sleeping area, a work desk, a compact kitchen, and a bathroom. Entry is through a hatch, reached by a folding ladder. From the street, the building is nearly invisible, a white stripe between 2 facades that most pedestrians mistake for a ventilation shaft. The house does not announce itself. It simply exists, quietly insisting on its own legitimacy. Szczesny named it after Israeli author Etgar Keret, whose short fiction operates on the same principle. Entire human worlds compressed into a few dense paragraphs, nothing wasted, nothing decorative. Keret himself stayed here during creative residencies, and that remains the building's official purpose, temporary accommodation for writers and artists. The logic is precise. A space this compressed demands a particular kind of focus. Distraction becomes architecturally impossible. The Keret house is less a home than a proof of concept, evidence that meaning does not require volume. Where it ends, our next entry begins from the opposite premise. Rather than shrinking inward, that structure rotates outward, tracking the sun across the sky and turning the house itself into a living climate instrument. A house that needs no heater and no air conditioner sounds like a marketing claim. The Heliodome, completed by Eric Vassar in 2011 in the Alsatian village of Kosvilla, about 30 kilometers northwest of Strasbourg, is not a marketing claim. It is number 6 on our list, and it works because of a single geometric decision made before a single wall was built. Vassar was a furniture designer, not an architect. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Furniture designers think about how an object inhabits space, how light falls across a surface at different hours, how form and function become the same thing. At some point, Vassar extended that logic to an extreme conclusion. What if a house were designed the way a sundial is designed, not to resist the sun, but to be governed by it? The answer required going back to a fact taught in secondary school. Earth's axis tilts at approximately 23 degrees relative to the plane of its orbit. That tilt is why seasons exist. It is why the sun arcs high across the sky in summer and stays low in winter. Vassar took that angle and built it directly into the structure. The Heliodome leans 23 degrees from vertical. Its broad glazed face points due south. In winter, when the sun is low, light pours deep into the interior and warms the floor slabs. In summer, when the sun climbs high, the roof overhang intercepts it completely. The geometry does the work that mechanical systems would otherwise do. From the outside, the building looks like something between a gyroscope and a spacecraft that has chosen a quiet corner of France to land in. Polygonal faces, wooden cladding, a tilt that the eye reads as an optical illusion. Inside, several levels are connected by stairs, and the organizing principle is not the conventional logic of rooms, but the movement of light through the day and across the year. Vassar spent roughly a decade developing the concept before construction was complete. He did not claim to have invented passive solar architecture, which has a long history. What he did was push the principle to the point where idea and form become indistinguishable from each other. The Heliodome does not use the sun as a resource, it is structured by the sun as a condition. The obvious question remains, what happens on a grey November week when Alsace sees no direct sunlight for days? Vassar incorporated backup heating, but the building's entire logic rests on a foundational assumption. The sun will come. There is something almost devotional about that bet. A man spent 33 years building a house he never finished, and that might be exactly the point. Robert Bruno was a sculptor, and when he decided to create his greatest work, he didn't reach for clay or bronze, he reached for steel, a canyon edge in Texas, and 3 decades of solitary labor. This is number 5 on our list, and it sits above Ransom Canyon like something that crawled out of a prehistoric dream and forgot to keep moving. Bruno arrived at the site in 1974 with the first sheets of metal and almost no conventional blueprints. He worked alone, no crew, no contractors, welding the structure by hand the way a sculptor shapes material, letting the form reveal itself rather than imposing it from a drawing board. The result, after 33 years, was a steel structure weighing 110 tons, balanced on 4 curved legs above the canyon drop. From the outside, it resists easy description. It resembles a whale or an insect or something in between. A rounded body, elongated limb-like supports, circular windows that read as eyes, and a surface covered in weld seams that run across the steel like scales on a living thing. Step inside and the strangeness deepens. There are no right angles. Rooms transition into one another through organic curves, and the space does 2 contradictory things at once. It opens up and it presses in. Bruno often said the house told him what to do next. He was, by his own account, less an architect than a listener. He died in 2008 without completing the structure, and the unfinished state has become inseparable from what the building means. His widow maintains the site today and occasionally leads tours for those who make the journey out to the canyon. The steel creature still stands on its curved legs, still stares at the Texas landscape through empty window eyes, still waiting for something that will never come. Some things are most honest when they remain unresolved. Next, we'll visit a house that turns the concept of sunlight into its entire architectural logic. A house was fired like pottery. The entire thing. Walls, floors, arches, furniture, all of it baked into a single ceramic mass in the Colombian Andes. That is not a metaphor. That is number 4 on our list. Casa Terracotta, built by architect Octavio Mendoza Morales in Villa de Leyva, a mountain town in Colombia known for its colonial streetscapes and one of the largest cobblestone plazas on the South American continent. The reason this structure exists at all comes down to one architect's refusal to accept the premise that modern building requires steel and concrete. Mendoza spent roughly 20 years constructing Casa Terracotta without either. No reinforced frames, no industrial binders, only clay, water, and fire. The method was closer to ceramics than to construction. Walls were hand-shaped in layers, surfaces were sculpted rather than assembled, and when the form was complete, the building became its own kiln. Fire was introduced from within. Temperatures climbed until the clay vitrified, fusing into a single, continuous, monolithic ceramic body. Approximately 500 tons of clay transformed. What you see when you walk inside is the direct consequence of that process. Curves everywhere, rounded arches, surfaces that carry the texture of fired earth, furniture that appears to grow organically from the floor rather than sit on top of it. No straight lines, no industrial coldness. The material itself does functional work beyond aesthetics. Terracotta regulates interior temperature, manages humidity, and operates as a passive climate system, a significant advantage in the variable conditions of the Andean highlands. Casa Terracotta is not an art installation. People live in it. Visitors can tour it. It functions as a house in every practical sense, which is precisely what makes it remarkable. It is the largest ceramic object in the world, unofficially, and it proves that the oldest building material in human history can carry a 21st century home without compromise. The next entry on our list made a different alliance, not with fire, but with steel, and pursued it alone for 33 years above a canyon in Texas. A man spent 25 years building upward for a single reason. He couldn't see the mountain. That is the entire logic behind the Goose Creek Tower, a 12-story log structure rising more than 55 meters above the Alaskan wilderness, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Anchorage, near the small community of Talkeetna. It is, improbably, a private residence. Philip Widener, an Alaskan attorney known for being stubborn and fiercely independent, began stacking log cabins on top of one another sometime in the late 1980s. Each new floor was added for the same reason as the last. The surrounding boreal forest kept growing, and with it the view of Denali, the highest peak in North America, kept disappearing behind the trees. So Widener built higher, then higher still. No architects were involved. No plans were submitted to any regulatory authority. He worked from his own calculations, using timber sourced locally, and continued adding floors for approximately a quarter of a century. The result looks like something drawn by a restless child. Log sections of varying sizes, stacked at slightly different angles, boarded galleries jutting outward, staircases that seem to lead to open air. Locals have long called it the Dr. Seuss house, after the American illustrator whose fantastical towers carry exactly that quality. Impossible, absurd, and somehow completely convincing. Inside, by available accounts, there are living quarters, a kitchen, and an observation deck at the very top. That deck is the point. From there, if Widener's design holds true, the view of Denali finally clears the tree line. The tower has since become a landmark of sorts, photographed by passing travelers on the park's highway, debated as folk art, architectural eccentricity, or simply one man's very expensive line of sight. Widener reportedly welcomed the attention. What remains unresolved is the question of structural certification. No official safety data appears to be publicly available for the building. Whether it qualifies as engineering or as faith is, perhaps, a matter of perspective. This is number 3 on our list. A man with no architectural training, no hired help, and no blueprints spent nearly 4 decades digging one of the most remarkable underground complexes in the United States, and grew citrus trees inside it. That man was Baldassare Forestier, a Sicilian immigrant who arrived in Fresno, California in the early 20th century with modest savings and an apparently inexhaustible stubbornness. Number 2 on our list, the Forestier Underground Gardens, Fresno, California. The story begins with a failure that refused to stay a failure. Forestier bought land intending to farm it, only to discover that just beneath the topsoil lay hardpan, a dense, impenetrable layer of compacted clay, utterly hostile to agriculture. The land was, by every practical measure, worthless for his purposes. His response was to go around the problem by going through it, downward. From roughly 1906 until his death in 1946, Forestier excavated entirely by hand, carving out a labyrinth of more than 70 rooms, galleries, courtyards, and tunnels, descending as deep as 10 meters below the scorching surface of California's Central Valley, where summer temperatures routinely exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Underground, he did something that sounds impossible until you see it. He planted a working citrus orchard. Lemons, oranges, and grapefruits grew in subterranean atriums, fed by sunlight channeled through carefully positioned light shafts he designed himself. He also built a chapel, a fish pond, a bedroom, a kitchen, and an aqueduct. The underground temperature remained naturally stable and cool, a passive climate system that predated air conditioning by decades. What makes Forestier's achievement genuinely strange is the absence of any formal plan. He worked intuitively, adjusting direction as he went, reading the rock rather than reading blueprints. The complex was never finished. Death interrupted the project in 1946, leaving entire sections incomplete. Today, the site is a California State Historical Landmark and is open to visitors. It is not a curiosity. It is evidence that one person, operating alone, can physically alter the landscape beneath their own feet. Where Forestier went down to escape the heat, our next entry went up, far beyond what reason would normally permit. A house that vanishes. Not as a metaphor, not as an artistic provocation, literally. At the push of a single button, a perfectly ordinary-looking suburban home outside Warsaw seals itself into a featureless concrete cube with no windows, no doors, and no visible point of entry. This is number 1 on our list, and it may be the most radical privately owned residence built anywhere in the world in the 21st century. The architect behind it is Robert Konieczny of KWK Promes. And the concept driving the safe house is as simple as it is extreme. A home that can protect itself completely when left unattended. The client's request was straightforward. He needed a property he could abandon for extended periods without worry. No caretakers, no conventional alarm systems, just a structure capable of becoming its own fortress. Konieczny's answer was a building that operates on 2 entirely opposite registers. In its open state, the safe house reads as a welcoming, even generous piece of architecture. A green suburban plot, a tidy fence, panoramic glazing, a wooden deck. Light pours in, the house breathes. Nothing about it suggests what it is capable of. Then the transformation begins. Massive concrete panels, 45 centimeters thick, slide along their tracks and cover every window and every door frame. The wooden terrace folds inward. A drawbridge, the sole entrance, rises and locks the facade shut. Within minutes, the structure has shed its domestic identity entirely. What remains is a sealed monolith, a form with no apertures and no weaknesses. The architectural community did not miss the significance of what Konieczny had built. The safe house was widely described as one of the most uncompromising residential projects of its era, and Time magazine placed it among the best inventions of the year. But the project's power lies not in its engineering alone. It lies in the tension between its two states, the openness and the closure, the invitation and the refusal. Architecture as armor, worn only when necessary. The next project on our list pursued the opposite logic entirely, choosing not to shut the world out, but to disappear beneath it. Most people never question the shape of the room they sleep in. That turns out to be a choice, just one they never made consciously. 13 houses scattered across 4 continents prove that point with uncomfortable precision. A Nautilus shell rising from the ground in Mexico City, a wooden box balanced on a river stone in Serbia, a granite fortress carved into a Portuguese mountain, a bubble palace on the Mediterranean shore, a plane suspended above a Costa Rican jungle canopy, a brick shoe in Pennsylvania, a sliver of space wedged between Warsaw walls, a solar pendulum in Alsace, a steel monster over a Texas canyon, fired clay shaped over 20 years in Colombia, a log tower built across a quarter century in Alaska, a garden dug downward into California earth, and a concrete monolith outside Warsaw that can seal itself from the entire world with the press of a single button. 13 structures, 13 people who ask the same question and refuse to stop asking it. What does it actually mean to live the way you believe is right, even when everyone around you thinks you've lost your mind? Forestier dug alone for 40 years. Bruno welded steel for 33 and never finished. Widener stacked logs for 25 years just to reach the summit he'd imagined. Mendoza fired clay for 2 decades until his house became a single, unified vessel. These aren't stories about architecture. They're stories about the cost of a decision made against the current. The word madness gets used as a verdict. In every one of these cases, it was simply the opinion of people who chose not to try. If watching this made you glance around your own walls and wonder, even for a second, whether they had to be exactly where they are, then this episode did exactly what it was supposed to do. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, which of these 13 houses would you actually live in? And what does that say about you?